The moon is out, the time is right to watch Dating with Demoldey tonight. The Sopranos are here, Carmela and Tony, it's Mafia Week. On Dating with Demoldey, Demoldey grants your dating wishes. Click away, you'll be swimming with the fishes. So get your popcorn, your soda pop, Dating with Demoldey. Don't you stop.
All right, so the next section of the breakdown is intimacy. So intimacy, at least in a romantic relationship, is defined usually by two things. The first being, usually the one people think of, which is physical intimacy. But then there's also emotional intimacy. So emotional intimacy, per the Google, is defined as the ability to share your deepest thoughts, feelings, and vulnerabilities with another person and feeling seen, heard, and understood in return. So it involves being vulnerable, it involves trust, communication, and connection. Physical intimacy, as a lot of people know, it's sex, but it's also more than that. It involves physical touch, closeness, cuddling, hugging, kissing, sexual intimacy. Just depends on the nature of the relationship. It's not just limited, as I said, to sexual acts. Like physical intimacy can mean more than just that. Like it's putting your hand on someone's shoulder, putting your hand on the thigh when you drive, or on the small of someone's back when you're passing by them, or kissing them on their head, things like that. Or just being close in general, feeling safe. That's a huge part of physical intimacy, right? So we'll get into some physical intimacy stuff, but we'll also talk about a lot of emotional intimacy stuff between both Tony and Carmela. The lens in which we'll operate is through kind of like the 5 love languages thing. I don't know if you folks have heard of it or have taken it. It's a pretty big pop culture thing now. But basically the 5 love languages, it's these 5 styles of love. So the first one is words of affirmation, which is pretty self-explanatory. It's just the things you say to your partner to, I guess, describe your love via words. So saying things like, compliments, right? Or saying I love you, or being kind in the words that you say, right? Like, I writing a love letter, like I love you because you're so smart and funny and blah 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 blah. All these different things, or giving praise. It's another big thing. So words of affirmation, gifts, pretty self-explanatory. Physical items or experiences, flights, things like that. They're just things you can give your partner. Physical kind of manifestations of love. Acts of service, doing things. It basically means doing things for your partner. Washing the dishes, doing chores, things like that. But it also could be doing things to make their life easier, taking things off their plate. Like setting up dates, or being there for each other. Like basically doing the dirty work in a relationship. That's an act of service. Physical touch, as we mentioned, kissing, hugging, cuddling, touching, any sort of touch between two people. The last one is quality time. So this means when you're with each other, spending quality time together. The time you spend together is worthwhile. You guys connect. You have a lot of fun together. It's something you'll remember forever. That's quality time right there. So with this lens, we'll look at Tony and Carmela. We'll expose some trends, some good things, but a lot of bad things. So there are a lot of good things that Tony and Carmela do for each other, but often in unfortunate times we see them kind of shadowed or mirrored in bad things. So, for example, let's just say for acts of service, as much as we see acts of service where Tony or Carmela does something for one another, we also do see acts of disservice, ways that they are discourteous to each other, where they don't go out of the way for each other, or just for the record, where maybe they did something in the past and now they don't do it anymore. But throughout the series, we see all 5 of these things in play, right? I'll kind of go through all of them, and I guess we'll start with words of affirmation. Tony is, as I've talked about plenty of times, he's a smooth talker. He's got that, the W Riz, as they say. You talk about the Rizzler. He was the Rizzler before the Rizzler, right? With Carmela, he does say a lot of sweet things. He does definitely butter her up, saying things like, oh, how's my sweetheart, or, things of that nature. He's definitely a smooth talker. We've talked about this before, about how women don't necessarily like words of affirmation per se, because they know that a lot of men say things to try and manipulate them or get them on their side. But we see that from Tony. He kind of he rizzes Carmela up. I hate to say that, God, but he does use his words a lot. You do see certain moments where they have good words of affirmation. The one that comes to mind, at least off the dome, is when the end of season 1, right? They're in the restaurant. We've already talked about this with the family stuff, but where he says, like, you'll remember all the good moments and all those things. We also see some positive words of affirmation when with Whitecaps, where they're walking on the beach, and Carmela's like, wow, like, who are you, Tony Soprano? Like, it's a classic line, like, oh, who is this man, And they have a sweet moment walking on the beach and a kiss and all that, right? We see it in certain moments where they're in bed and, Tony, like, pleads his love for Carmela, like, oh, this is why I fell in love with you, or like, I love you, or whatever. We saw this is at the dinner, right? The dinner scene where Tony says, like, this is how I knew I loved Carmela. I bought the ring the next day, sort of stuff. Which is just so funny because it's just juxtaposed by him, having sex with his Gumar, like, the very next episode or the very next scene, So it's hard to look at some of these good things that Tony does because they're just so overshadowed by some of these bad things. But he does have moments where he is, has some emotional vulnerability and tells Carm he cares about her and all that. You see Carm really say the same to him, especially when he was in the hospital. Saying things like, Tony, you were my guy. You used to get me so hot, is what I remember her saying. A classic scene. And she says, oh, yeah, you're not going to hell, stuff like that, right? And so there are moments where they really do have some sweet things that they say to each other about how they care for each other and how they're always there. The unfortunate thing is that it's so overshadowed by the contempt they have for each other, by some of these things they say to each other that are so harsh and mean. And it's unfortunate. But yeah, I'd say in terms of their emotional intimacy, they do have good moments. As I mentioned, the bedroom talks, they do have good moments where Tony tries to reassure her because Carmela seems like a more anxious sort of person. But yeah, he can be there for her emotionally, right? Number 2, gifts. This is Tony's calling card. You talk about a crutch. Tony is he's a creature of habit, right? You watch it throughout the series that Tony just loves to go to his old bag of tricks, right? Old reliable, as they say. So often we see the trend, I mentioned this in the last one, but where Tony uses gifts, obviously number 1 is a way to get closer to Carmela, but it usually happens right before he cheats on her or after he cheats on her or whatever, and she eats it up. He gives gifts so often. And to be honest, the gifts are a gateway to sex. Plenty of times, we see it on numerous occasions where He gives her a coat and then they hook up. He gives her a fur and then she wears it with nothing else on. Where, he gives a ring or a piece of jewelry, whatever it is, he gets it for her, and that usually leads to some act of physical touch. Very few times do we see them, well, I shouldn't say few, but I'm just saying, like, there's a multitude of times where the gifts lead to some sort of, physical act. Or just, general happiness on Carmela's part. Because he knows Carmela, and he knows that she likes nice things. There's not really a sense that Carmela doesn't appreciate having nice things. You don't see her like, why would you get me this? I don't want this. No, she relishes in these gifts. She's like, ooh, this is so nice. I feel so taken care of, etc. We'll get into the whole gifts thing a little bit later, but definitely a thing that Tony does for sure. Big gift guy. And you don't really see Carmela give gifts. You don't really see her give Tony anything. You don't really see that. Tony also, gave that gun, right, to Carmela's father. A big thing that he did. And which was cool. But also the issue with all these gifts is that a lot of them are probably stolen, right? They're not really purchased in a legal or ethical way, and that's the issue, but that's aside the point. So anyways, gifts, big part. Acts of service. So we see this in a very traditional sense. And we could get into this more with the whole agency conversation later. But Tony and Carmela, to be honest, like they're both pretty equal when it comes to acts of service. I mean, you see Tony, first thing I wrote down was the bear, right? The bear in season 5 comes to the house and he, stays outside with the gun to protect them. Because Carmela and AJ were there home alone or whatever. Tony didn't have to do that. They're separated. He didn't have to protect his wife, his wife, who is separated from, but he does because he cares about her. You see with Carmela and just her homemaking duties generally, taking AJ here, there, and everywhere, doing the cooking, I don't want to say the cleaning because they do have a maid, but she does a lot for the family in terms of making the home. Cooking especially, throwing parties, having his friends over, getting things for him, buying him food, all that. And Tony, in return, provides the home with money, gives her an allowance, buys her things, new shoes, etc., new car, a nice house with the pool, everything, right? So that's Tony's end of the bargain, and she does her end of the bargain. Very traditional setup, right? And also, they act of service with each other by like being there for their children, going to their school, supporting, all that good stuff, right? Physical touch. We see this a lot with, as I mentioned, with the gifts, where Tony gives the gift and then they hook up, and that's kind of their trend, right? But, you don't see a lot of PDA from them. You might see them at like a family function, like kind of, arm on the shoulder sort of vibe. They don't really kiss. There was this one scene I remember, like Chris and Aid are just making out at Johnny Sack's house, which I thought was hilarious because you never see that from Tony and Carmela. Not big in PDA. Doesn't really feel like she's super touchy as a person, right? But you do see plenty of times where they both, kind of kiss on the cheek, kiss on the head, some of these more soft, like innocent physical touch, right? It's not all about sex. But you also see the physical touch manifest in taking care of each other, especially Carmela to Tony. Like Tony on numerous occasions gets shot, gets in a car accident, goes into a coma, whatever happens with him, right? Like she's there for him to take care of him. That's also part of physical intimacy, is being there and taking care of someone's body. That's huge. And we see Tony also be there for Carmela sometimes, right? Like when she's feeling bad. But you see that with Tony when he got food poisoning or whatever, and she's there for him and taking care of him. A lot of kisses on the head, right? You see it on the season 6 where she, goes down on him or whatever for his birthday. A classic like married person thing, like, oh, on your birthday you get something special. Like, I think that's funny. But yeah, plenty of times they cuddle in bed. I mean, they share beds, right? So that's a thing. They have that bedroom banter, the pillow talk, as they say. And anyway, so you notice I wanted to point out season 6 too. Like, I hate to say this, and because it makes me sound like I'm a horn dog or something, but sex really does matter in marriages, and for some couples, it could be a big barometer to their happiness. You see it with Tony and Carmela; they say that all the time, right? Like, we haven't had sex in months, or we're not having sex, like stuff like that. And then season 6, where it seems like they're in a good spot, like they talk about sex. Sex is brought up. They're going to dinner and doing all these things, right? So, I think the times where Tony and Carm are not good, they're not having sex. She's giving him the cold shoulder, and he has to find that sexual gratification elsewhere. If you want to talk about them both, I mean, Tony's big love language is physical touch by far. But we'll get into other stuff. Anyway, the last one's quality time. We see this a couple times where Tony kind of fails in his ability to spend quality time with her. For example, early season where they have an anniversary, he spends like 20 minutes talking to Johnny Sack, right? Which he could have just said hello and been like, hey, it's my anniversary, I gotta get back. But she's mad, and rightfully so. He spends a lot of the time talking to him. It's supposed to be a night for them, and he kind of fails to understand that. And it's not fair to her. It really isn't. But you see plenty of times he takes her out, takes her to the city, or they go to a concert, they go to a festival, like the Italian festival, and spend time together. Plenty of family parties together. In terms of dates, though, I don't know how often we see them go on dates, like legitimate dates. They go to Vesuvio all the time. They're always eating together. But that, to me, doesn't really feel like a date, per se. So, like you just see, again, the juxtaposition, right? The comparison between Tony and, let's just say, Tony and Gloria, right? Like, Tony takes Gloria, or, it's her idea, but still, like, they go to the zoo together, and then they, like, hook up in that one snake room. But still, it just shows the fact that Tony's willing to go to the zoo with this Gumar, but he's not willing to take his wife on something. And that's a big thing within relationships. It's not keeping the magic alive by doing things together. So that's a big way that they don't spend quality time together. But plenty of times that they do. So anyways, just kind of going down the list, right? The bedroom combos for words of affirmation are really good. But then on the other side, they do have really harsh and abusive words and language that they use for each other that it's not great. It's not great. And when you have contempt for each other, when you are mean to each other, it prevents each other from opening up. That's why we see so much stonewalling from the both of them. Because when they're, so this goes in the whole emotional intimacy thing, right? When you have Tony and or Carmela open up and it's met with sarcasm and ridicule, it prevents both of them from ever bringing anything up ever again. Because they know, well, if I bring this up, you're just going to make fun of me. If I bring this up, you're just going to laugh at me or use it as a thing against me. And so we see that with a lot of couples, that they don't want to open up, not because, like, there's something wrong with them, but because they've been mistreated in the past. They have some of that, bad experiences from the past where you've made them feel inadequate and invalidated. So, yeah, why would I bring up anything if it's just going to lead to me getting put down? 100% happens with both of them here. Another act of service that I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, but big time support from both sides. They're both there for each other in really hard moments. You see moments of grief, right? And throughout the series, there are so many funerals. There's so much death, so much, trauma. Let's just be honest, a lot of trauma in the show. People dying. Tony's mom dies, right? Season 3. Tony getting shot, attacks on his life. A lot of stuff happens, and Carmela's there for him. Is she always the best? Is she always the most healthy in the support? Not necessarily, but she's there. She's not absent. And same from him to her. He's there during hard moments too. And so I think that's what really makes a good marriage, is being there in the hard moments, showing up when it's hard. Plenty of funerals, they show up together. They are a unit. They are combined, right? It just shows their dedication to each other. Another big time thing that they do for each other is that they're supportive with their in-laws. I mean, Tony and Carmela's parents, he always has them over, always talking to them, having them for dinner, making conversation with the dad. Really tight, really close relationship with Carmela's father. That's big time. That's it. That's a huge thing that he does, right? So, really, really good. Really good thing that they both do for each other is being there for the in-laws. Because sometimes those in-law relationships, they're not easy. I mean, especially Carmela, right? She goes out of her way to have a good relationship with Tony's mom. And Tony's mom is a terrible person. Is not a good person. Very mean, very hard to work with. And she puts up with it. So you got to give her a shout for that. You got to give Carmela a shout. Moving down the list, as I mentioned with words of affirmation, you can really see that Tony is a big words of affirmation guy. How so? Well, you see it when they have these phone calls, right? Like when she's out in Italy or when he's out in Italy or Paris for her, right? Where they're talking on the phone. Tony's a talker. Tony doesn't want to admit it, but he's kind of a softie. He likes to talk on the phone. He likes to have conversations. We see it multiple times where, so for instance, the first one where Tony's in Italy and they're talking, and he's kind of, not really saying much, and she says like, "Oh, is it as bad as this phone call?" That little like quip, and he's like, "All right, well, screw it. I don't know why I called it anyway," sort of thing. It's those sorts of moments. It's like, hey, like, I know this phone call's not great, but you don't need to like be an asshole about it. So Tony really values those conversations. That's why you see when they're separated and he's at the hotel and the sunrise is coming. Who does he call? He calls her. They talk on the phone. They have a really, to be honest, it's a pretty intimate conversation. They're talking on the phone at sunrise. They're separated, but they're in bed talking to each other. That to me like shows like, okay, like they couldn't not talk to each other. That's kind of, to be honest with you, that's the kind of stuff that is like, it kind of reminded me like, this must have been what it was like when they first got together. Like calling each other on the phone, like that just feels like very, not like juvenile, but like early days romance. It was like, wow, like that kind of feels like it brought you back. Because she's talking to him on the phone and like, oh, what are you wearing? What are you doing right now? Blah blah blah. I don't know, I just really appreciated that scene. But anyways, another reason why I say Tony appreciates words is because on multiple occasions he tries to get to know the people he sleeps with. And it's funny because men usually after they sleep with someone, again, generalization here, but they don't want to talk. That's the last thing they want to do. They get the post-nut clarity or whatever, and they just want to get out of there. But Tony talks to all of his gumars and even some of the escorts that he frequents. He wants to have conversations with them. And it's like, oh, like you are more emotional than you let on. You want to kind of have an emotional connection with people you have sex with. We see that. Otherwise, he would just tell them, get the hell out of here, right? He could still be a pig. I'm not denying that. But there are moments where you see him like, oh, okay, like he kind of has a heart here. He kind of wants to have an emotional connection. And he brings it up in the fight with Carmela when they're going to get separated, right? Where he says she had something to say. And I think this kind of encapsulates a bigger issue that a lot of marriages have, but Tony and Carmela have for sure, where it appears that, he's not getting that conversational itch from Carmela, and he kind of seeks it elsewhere. That's why, with Valentina kind of, but you really see it with Gloria where they kind of connect emotionally. And they talk and they have good convo and it's all fine and dandy. And that's where he was kind of lacking with Irina, right? Is language barrier, like they didn't really talk about much. You see with Tony, he says, well, I talked to her because she had something to say and because we talked about stuff. And you see Carmela retort, well, if you wanted to talk, I'm right here. I'm right here, right? But she also brings that up as a reason why she was into Furio, where she says, yeah, like, Furio, when I'm with him, we connect, we have good conversations, we talk about things. And Furio says that to her, too, like, oh, yeah, I broke up with this dental woman or whoever because we didn't talk, we didn't have good conversations. Even for myself. You can't, convos, right? Like, conversation, talking, that's what sustains love. Think about every person you've been with. Think about the time you spend with them, the hours you could spend with someone you care about. You just talk all night. You talk till the sun rises. That's love. That's what love is like built on, is those conversations that are engrossing. You're clicking. You could be with them. You don't want to stop talking, right? Every person I've loved, that's been the case. Where it's like, oh my gosh, like I could spend all day with you. I want to spend all night with you. I don't get bored of you. I'm addicted to talking to you, right? Like, that's love. That's what love is. So anyway, that's the issue that they have in their marriage. Is that like they don't talk anymore? They don't have these good conversations. They're in a rut. They're in a lull. They're in a stage where they don't really talk that much, and they find that conversational itch elsewhere. Tony with his Kumar, and then also Carmela, with Furio. But the issue is that Carmela says, "Well, I'm right here. Talk to me. I want you to talk to me." And then Tony retorts with but all you want to do is bitch and bitch and bitch. Fuck it, it just gets all mad, right? And there's something to be said, you gotta find a good balance, because when you're married, and I'm not an expert, but when you're in a long-term relationship, there's a lot that you already do know about each other, right? You get to a certain stage where it's like, all right, like, I don't need to have the 21 questions game. I don't need to ask what your favorite color is because I've already known that it was, hazel green for the last 10 years, right? So there's a lot that you already know about each other. It's kind of pointless to even talk about. I get that. But with them both, it seems like they don't, they kind of have that itch, but they don't really put any work in. They don't try to connect. They don't try to have these moments. They seek it elsewhere. It's not that Carmela's not open to it. She even says, "Oh, I'm right here," but Tony doesn't see it, I guess. So that's just something I thought was interesting, right? Is that they really do need to connect emotionally. They need to find some time to reconnect because they had that to start, But anyway, let's see. Yeah, Carmela big on the acts of service, as we mentioned earlier, with Tony's mom. But also you kind of see it, too, with the fact that she's kind of accomplice to Tony. She has no problem hiding guns. She has no problem hiding money from the FBI. Being there and not turning him in, mind you. She could easily have turned him in when she wanted to divorce this man. She could have been in the witness protection program. It could have happened lickety-split, right? But she doesn't. So she's loyal to Tony. She's definitely loyal to Tony. That's a big part of the ask for her, for sure. In terms of quality time, there's plenty of times where Tony is absent. They do go to dinner and lunch and all that stuff from time to time. But then there's times where he misses dinner, where he has to leave dinner early, where there's an event and he doesn't really show up, right? Or he leaves. Like that's not fair to her. It's not quality time really if he only comes for like a minute, right? Plenty of ways too in terms of money that Tony kind of does a disservice, where or even just words of affirmation, right? Like where, it had to take or even sorry, I'm bad at finishing thoughts, folks. Where Tony in the whole estate planning thing, right? It takes him like multiple episodes to even get on board with her. It shouldn't take that long to get on board with your wife. Just make a decision, stick with it, right? And so it forces her to steal money from the bird feeder. She kind of goes behind his back, does that, which isn't great. But we see with the spec house, and this is like a multi-season thing, which, I don't know if that like storyline was necessary per se, but we see it multiple times where she asks him, "Hey, I need you to talk to this building guy. Can you get the building permit? Can you do this? Can you blah, blah, blah." Multiple times, over and over and over. And he claims that, I'm going to do it, and he never does it. So, it's bad on Tony. He should be the one to do that. And he shouldn't, he should do that act of service for her, but he doesn't want to because he's lazy. So, a lack of support for her, not great by any stretch. But yeah, looking down, plenty of bad touch. Tony can be very physically abusive, kind of like what we talked about with the conflict stuff. Plenty of times where, she throws stuff at him, he puts hands on her, gets physical, not great. But also plenty of times where Tony does step up and where, he protects her, gives her a place to stay. Even when and not this is like great. Oh, he protected her in the safe house when there was the war between New York and New Jersey going on. Like, 2 thumbs up for getting her involved in a mob family like murder thing. Like, but he does take care of her and keep her safe. That's true. He does send her flowers after they have sex. Oh yeah, that's another physical touch thing. They have this kind of moment in the pool after Marco Polo where they hook up. And he sends her flowers. So he's very traditional in this way. And that's the thing with Tony. He's very traditional. It sounds like gifts are a very, like, courting thing for him. But then he doesn't come inside, and then Carm feels used, and then she's like, all right, well, screw it. He didn't come inside after he fucked me. Now I'm going to proceed with the divorce thing, which was, obviously not great. Yeah, one way that they're not, good for or there for each other. Carmela can kind of get a little bit jealous. We see that throughout, where she doesn't believe Tony when he says nothing happened with him and Adriana when they get in the car accident, right? And actually believes that she was, going down on him or whatever. That's not great. Oh, her getting jealous. Oh yeah, with the movie, right? The Cleaver movie, where she thinks, obviously Chris knows you were hooking up with some Asian broad or whatever, and he's like, no, that didn't happen. So yeah, Carmela can kind of express her jealousy sometimes, and it makes sense. There's a lack of trust, a total lack of trust in their relationship, because Tony commits adultery and infidelity all the time. But anyway, I'll finish up this one on a good note. I think there are times where there are some good moments. Well, sorry. Let me get to the good moments next. Let me first interject with I mentioned this before with the conflict resolution, is that there's such an inconsistency in the way that they handle conflict resolution. There are so many ups and downs. There's so many moments that they have that are good, and then it's just followed by a terrible moment, right? There's one in season 6 where they have a hug, they have a good moment, they have the hug, and then it devolves into this physical thing where she throws a vase at him. Or, plenty of times where she kisses his hand or, goes, or kisses him, goes down on him, and then the next thing you know, she's, sleeping in another bed because he got into a fight with Bobby, right? So there's a ton of back and forth, a ton of ups and downs that aren't great, but she can be there for him. You want to talk about Carm being supportive. She really is. She puts up with a lot. And I don't think Tony deserves it, but, they do it each other's ways. And I think just overall, just to wrap it on a bow, I thought the really cute moment was Carmela saying, "Oh, it's the first day of work. I feel like a mom," sort of thing. Like, I thought that was pretty adorable. But anyway, I digress. This is why The Sopranos is such a good show and so interesting. They have so many moments of really sweet things, dancing at the wedding. Like, it's, there are some good moments between the two. And they do love each other. There is love there. But there's a lot of unhealthy and abusive stuff that makes it hard. It makes it really complicated. But that's why everybody loves the show, and they consider it one of the best in the world. So this is definitely not a model relationship by any stretches. But there are some good things to be seen throughout. It's just in terms of emotional, physical intimacy, They do have sex. They do have moments of good physical touch, but it's also, there's plenty of bad. Plenty of moments of good emotional intimacy, but plenty of moments of bad. So, you talk about the ultimate mixed message of a relationship. This is that. So.
Dating with Demoldey, he's an Italian hero, end of story. Dating with Demoldey, all his glory.
Woke up this morning,
Flirting with Demoldey's on.
Tony and Carmela, plenty of right and wrongs. We ain't no fats, no racks, no wiretaps. This on this video, I'll break your kneecaps. Dating with Demoldey,
Dating with Demoldey,
an Italian hero.
end of story.
Dating with Demoldey, no